and a complete loss of wokeness. You have been warned.
Man, I tell you, every time I hear the intro, I love it. I've waited like 2 years to play that freaking intro, and now that every time I play it, it brings chills down my spine. So I want to thank PL Channel PL Channel 2 is what the name of his channel. He actually came up with that end part of the intro with the whole spaceman and all that stuff, and it was brilliant. And I thank you very much for that intro. I love it. Okay, so first of all, I want to thank a very major super chat that we got before the show started. From Rez. I think that Cheshire, you had cut it out?
Yes, he said, oh, sorry, hold on. I have an echo of myself. Hold on, is that better?
It sounds great on my end.
Does it sound good on the outside, though? Because I should not have been able to hear myself. It should be fine now. So I'm going to assume that people can hear me on the outside for the time being, and I'm going to read this out. It said, well, we're here. It's real. It's happening. And NSS is back in the right hands. I'd like to say thank you to Steve, Chesh, Reds, Ruhif, the community at large, and last but certainly not least, Bool. Thank you all for seeing this through and not giving up on this channel. Let's have a better 2.5 years this time.
Thank you so much for that. And Rez has been a huge supporter from day one. I did want to make sure that when we brought NonSec back, it had some of the elements of the old, more elements of the new. And I think we've effectively done that. This is our second episode in our season 4, 4.5 or 5, depending on what he wants to call it. We've had like really intense background discussions on what season this is.
We've been arguing about it.
I just found out that David is able to join us. So if we can get, if you get me a link, I get it to him while we introduce our guest.
Yeah, I've got a link for him.
So do you want to introduce a guest or should I?
I think you should do it. You're the one who did all the work to get all the guests.
It's my 5%. All I do is 5% of the work because basically I just get people. That's it. So everything else it's all B. All right. So first of all, I want to introduce a friend of mine, Dr. Jonathan McLatchie. He is a biologist. He is somebody that I've known for quite some time. I happened to have the honor of going out to lunch with him and his wife, and it was just incredible to actually sit down and talk to somebody and talk about so many different types of topics at once. So I brought him on to kind of look at things from a biological standpoint, from an old Earth creationist position. But Jonathan, so good to see you again, my friend.
Great to be here. Thanks so much for having me on, Steve. I really enjoyed our recent lunch in California, and look forward to further interactions.
Yeah, food was good too. It's actually we found a really decent hole in the wall place. We also got Dapper Dino. People may remember Dapper Dino. He is also a person who is into biology, an ex-nuke like myself, and he's going to be helping evaluate some of these creationist claims from a evolutionary point position. Nobody really knows his theological stances because he doesn't share them.
That's true.
It's fine, but we do know that he is an evolutionist.
Yes, my theological stance is, if it contradicts the science as it appears in the peer-reviewed, literature, then I have a problem with your theology. Otherwise, I don't care. That's my theological stance.
That's pretty straightforward, right?
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
And Dapper, why don't you introduce Sal for us? Since I've watched Sal on a couple different videos, but you know Sal Cordova better than I do. So if you want to introduce him, while I get David the link, I would be greatly appreciative.
All right. Well, Sal is, of course, he's a friend of mine. I've been on his channel. He's been on mine. Sal is a young Earth creationist, and he's working with Dr. John Sanford on his work regarding things like genetic entropy and stuff like that. So Sal has some background in biochemistry, biology, and mathematics. And I believe, Sal, don't you have an engineering degree? Maybe I'm wrong about that. I'll let Sal answer that because next thing you know, I'm going to start saying things that aren't true about them.
I missed the last part. What was that you said?
Oh, I said I think you have an engineering degree, but now I'm not remembering, so maybe
Yes,
I'm wrong. I don't know.
I have 5 science degrees. I include the engineering degree in it. I was in the aerospace and defense industry for 20 years before I got into biology. So when you said peer review, I actually one of the lucky creationists that got into peer review, a paper critical of evolutionary biology.
Yeah, it's rather interesting too that you have that many academic credentials, and I mean legit ones too. I listened to you and Gutsick Gibbons talk about genetics, and you seem to be on point. So I was really stoked to have you come on, because you are a young Earth creationist that actually has a science education, not just somebody who just says they have a science education when they really don't. So I think this is going to be one of the best shows we've had on young Earth creationism in quite some time, which
I think
has
it will
been
be,
a
because
first in a long time.
A lot of the time they just turn into just people screeching and yelling at each other, and that luckily does not seem to be the case of what's going to happen today. However, if people demand a dumpster fire, there's not much
we can see what we can do.
It.
Yes, I mean, things happen, but no, I mean, we want to show respect for the guests, and we're going to try to treat the topic with some sense of respect. Now, I will put it out there: we are finding the worst creationist arguments. There are much more technical creationist arguments, and I'm sure Dr. McLatchie, myself, and Sal, and Dapper, we are aware of them. Those are going to be maybe for another show when I have if I ever get Dr. Thompson on to talk about DDX11 gene or things of that nature, that'd be great for human chromosome 2. Or Safadi might come on. But right now we're going to be looking at the worst of the worst. We do have a super chat from Sandring, a longtime friend of the show. Sandring for $100 says, sings on the second show of Non Sequitur, our true host gave to us a few new awesome guests and a partridge in a nondescript tree. Does he want me to sing that? I guess I should. Well, you know what?
Yes, Steve. He wants you to sing it and not go with a William Shatner album version.
No. I like the way William Shatner sings, actually. You have the voice.
In a pear tree.
Sing the whole thing.
On the second show of Non-Sec, our true host gave to us a few new awesome guests and a partridge in a nondescript tree.
See, we could be bought. It's okay. All right, so we're gonna let Dave come in here in a second. Okay, there he is. Hey, that was
transition.
That was smooth.
Hello, everyone.
That was pro.
And he's got audio right out the gate.
Awesome.
Hey,
well, welcome back, Dave.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm so glad I'm able to join. I didn't think I was going to be able to make it, but thank you so much for having me on. It is a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be back. Good to see you. I actually had a pleasure of meeting Sal a few months ago, and it was a very nice event. Yeah,
I'm glad you could join us, because this was actually your idea, and it was a great idea, and I decided to run with it and actually make that it happened. So Surgeon General for $1.99 has a sticker which says thanks, appreciate it, Surgeon General. So let's kind of dive into this particular topic, and then we'll get each guest's point of view on it. So David, you had basically kind of been through what was called Accelerated Christian Education, which is ACE is the acronym, but that's basically an education, from what I understand, that is a Christian-based young Earth creationist source that treats education from a strictly biblical point of view. So in other words, anything that goes against the biblical perspective is automatically by fiat wrong, and therefore anything relating to human origins and biology relating to common ancestry must be wrong. And then they try to basically come up with educational material for homeschooling to, I guess, explain to children biology in a very non-scientific, non-biological way. Is that kind of a fair assessment?
Yeah, that is absolutely fair. Accelerated Christian education is used both in private schooling and homeschooling as well. A church school, a private school, 3rd grade up until 6th grade, that use the Accelerated Christian Education curriculum. So I was there for a few years, so I'm semi-familiar with it. Accelerated Christian Education is probably one of the worst curriculums I have ever seen. Basically, the way that Accelerated Christian Education is supposed to work is that students basically work in a one-room schoolhouse, and they do the work in cubicles, and a person with autism and ADHD and all that, being forced to be in a little cubicle all day long, obviously is not a good match. I actually want to see if I can pull up a picture for you, just for the general audience to see exactly what A.C.E. looks like.
It's just generally for used in okay, like for example, when Hovind was talking about teaching students, he was talking about doing so in biblical churches. He was talking about doing it in 4 years. It wasn't like actual homeschool, but this is actually for parents to homeschool their children too, as well.
Yeah, in fact, this is the actual curriculum that Mr. Kent Hovind uses.
Is it? Oh, is it?
At one point.
Okay.
So, and I know that because I asked him, and I brought it up. Is there a way for me to share my screen or send you a picture? Because I think it'll be kind of helpful to, I don't know if I can share my screen or not.
I just want to ask for a clarification. So when Kent Hovind says he taught science, what he means is he handed out workbooks.
Yes,
is that
basically
accurate?
He worked out.
That's basically what he did. He didn't actually teach anything. He just handed out workbooks.
Yeah, I had actually asked. I mean, people know that I know Kent pretty well. I had asked him directly a long time ago, "Did you ever teach anything that was accredited?" And his answer was no. I mean, he flat out said, "No, I didn't. I've never taught anything that was accredited." So he never actually taught high school. Sal, are you familiar with the this particular group or educational thing from A.C.E?
Not at all. Not at all. I was raised in a secular environment. I was a theistic evolutionist, raised in the Catholic Church, went to high school, learned evolution. So this is all new to me. And
okay, so you were more. Are you more the lines of like I would say like Huros, only like
no, I'm
originally like theistic. Right. But originally you were a theistic evolutionist.
Yeah, originally, and so this is interesting to. I mean, if you want some comments here,
absolutely, yes.
I've never thought about. It's only when I got invited to the show I began to wonder, gee, how do we teach Christian children to pass on the faith? Because I was kind of glad I had a secular education and got to see the other side. So I do kind of wonder, I don't think it's healthy to be subjecting kids to a totally insular environment, because when they start to meet people that have other viewpoints, I think they can I think that can be very uncomfortable. So this is kind of interesting to hear that they actually start with the Bible, because when I teach Christians, I actually don't. I get flack for that, but oh well.
Okay, well, let's look at this. V, you on what you have on the screen right now. This is something that David sent to us. This is really what kind of caught my attention. You want to kind of like read it out to people, and then maybe we can all go over it.
Yeah.
Quote,
Yeah.
in
So
evolutionary circles, a bird is considered more complex than an octopus. Yet the eye of an octopus is much more complex than the eye of a bird. If a bird evolved from the octopus, why does the octopus have a more complex eye? This is more evidence that a master designer created both animals.
Okay, so I mean, I'm looking at Jonathan. I'm just going because we're both going. Man, there's just so much to unpack here. I mean, every line has something. Probably we could find something wrong with on multiple levels. Now, again, I want to make this very clear before I ask Jonathan on this. This is not typical of young earth creationists. I've dealt with so many young earth creationists. I've dealt with obviously, Humphreys and Safadi and all the big names, and I have a respect for them to some degree. At least they really do try to put out something along the lines that makes some sense. This is not that caliber, okay? Not by any stretch of imagination. So I really want to make it obvious that we are cherry picking here. But Jonathan, just as somebody who is a biologist and who is a Christian, what would you make of this?
I would be very interested to learn who says that a bird evolved from an octopus. I don't know any
Where did that come from?
biologist.
Nobody. I've never heard of this before until
it sounds to me like you're saying citation needed.
So I don't know where it came from, but I have a hypothetical. And my hypothetical is that this is conflating a idea of a great chain of being in which all of both inanimate and spiritual or objects are in some kind of hierarchy. And there was this idea in like ancient Greek philosophy that some things could sometimes move up the great chain of being and that everything would be somewhere on there. So if an octopus is lower on the great chain of being, then eventually maybe it would become a bird which is somewhere higher on the great chain of being. Of course, the Great Chain was never actually written out in full by anyone.
It's like, and who
it's been abandoned
decides
for a
what
long
is
time. Right,
what is
exactly.
better than which?
So, and I also don't know that there's actually a direct connection there, but it's the only place I can see anyone getting this is by conflating Great Chain of Being, which was common even through the medieval period, and evolution, which is a very different concept and only has a connection in that one thing can become a new thing.
This literally, to me, is like taking the phylogenetic tree and putting it in a wood chipper. This is. I mean,
oh, yeah.
It's just. But Manya says,
I mean,
5 New Zealand, I'm peeing with laughter. And yeah, I mean, look, we are making fun of this, and I agree. But again, this is not typical. There's no way in evolution where anybody says if a bird will octopi. You know,
I'm also not aware of anyone. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was saying, how many Christian children are taught this? I mean, as a young Earth creationist, this is really, I mean, personally, I mean, we can laugh at this, but this is tragic.
I agree.
I agree.
This really bothers me.
Dave, that's a great question for you, because I think, you know, you being a part of that, this is how you learned it. And yeah, I think it is a tragedy because, again, and there goes my background. Whatever, do your thing, Dave. Yeah. Don't mind me. And welcome to the Non-Sequitur Show.
And if you don't mind, I do want to point out that this workbook here is specifically geared for 8th grade. This is an 8th grade workbook.
That but that makes it even worse, right? That makes it even worse that in 8th grade they're teaching something along the lines of if a bird, evolved from octopi. And why is a bird considered more complex than an octopus? I mean, they're both pretty complicated creatures.
It's not. That's the thing is it's not actually. There's no way to measure overall complexity in an animal. Like, you can make judgments. Like, you can say, oh, sponges are simpler because they don't have tissues.
Multicellular, yeah.
But
like you might measure
when you're at the point where
you might measure complexity in terms of number of cell types, for example.
Okay, yeah, but I feel like octopi and birds are going to have pretty similar numbers. I mean, they're all coelomates. They've all got muscles, nerve cells.
Birds are more complicated because they have feathers and are able to fly.
They're both eukaryotes.
Okay, but what about chromatophores? Like an octopus can actually change its color on the fly. Well, there's that. Like,
so can a cuttlefish.
And each arm on an octopus has its own like semi-autonomous section of the nervous system, so that each arm is actually making its own basic decisions on its own. But then that sensory information is then being fed to the brain. That's sort of a ring of nerve cells around the mouth. I mean, cephalopods are insanely complicated, and so are birds. And the idea that you're just going to unambiguously declare that birds are the more complicated just seems bonkers to me.
In Canada, oh, go ahead.
All right, so I do want to point out that in the very beginning of the workbook, they do provide vocabulary words where they actually define what they mean. If you don't mind, I actually want to go through some of these definitions.
Is kind in there?
Surprisingly, no. Kind is not in this.
I am not surprised.
They do not define what a kind. But I want to point out a couple of the things that I highlighted and sent you a bunch of Twitter messages with some screenshots of these books. And here's how they define a couple things. All right, the word assumption means that something is assumed true without benefit of evidence. Evolution is defined as the false theory that assumes that all forms of life developed from a lower forms of life. Lots of problems with that definition.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, let's take them individually. The first thing that you said with the was with assumptions. I don't really have a big problem with what they said on that. Does anybody?
I don't have a problem in that. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I have a. So this is a delay. I have one problem in that I know what they're doing with it, which is they're going to say that scientific assumptions are themselves not built on facts. So, for instance, when you're in physics class and you want to calculate how long it's going to take for a ball to drop from a certain height, you assume the force of gravity on Earth. But it's not an assumption under their definition because it is based on evidence. It's based on prior experiments about gravity.
Sure.
And now that other experiments have done it, now you can assume it. And that's how assumptions usually work in science is we say, all right, we already know this, so we don't have to rederive it. We'll just accept it for now. And if for some reason our experiment violates it, then we can go back and look. So assumptions in all over science are actually the conclusions of earlier science.
Yeah, well, most of them. I mean, there are some fundamental assumptions of science that are axiomatic, such as like reality is real. We can observe the universe. Yeah, the philosophy of science. We can observe the universe and draw inference, and those inferences can be then built upon that.
But
theories
knowing
that
young Earth creationism.
Yeah,
knowing young Earth creationism. When they say things, oh, sorry.
It sounds to me like you're saying, hey, listen, I don't have a problem with this as a standalone, but I'm concerned that you're going to end up using this standalone
that's fair enough.
later down the line in a way that you're not agreeing with.
For RGD Gaming, welcome to Initiate. Thank you, RGD Gaming, for becoming an Initiate, a member to the channel. We do have membership now. We do have Patreon now. I got the original Patreon back. So we'll be building that up over time. But so the second thing with the evolution, the problem I have with that one is it automatically assumes evolution is false just by fiat. It doesn't give any rhyme or reason to say why evolution is false.
Right. It's a loaded definition. And Steve, I think I sent you the screenshot of the page for these definitions if you want to pull them up. I think it's
I have to send it to V because she's the producer.
Okay.
I can't screen share. What did you send me and where?
The second one's interesting.
Yeah,
about evolution being
I sent
false.
it to you.
Yeah, it's poisoning the well right out the gate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, exactly.
Well, as a Christian creationist, that's what I want to communicate. But, I believe, on the other hand, it's important that they learn it. I think every kid at some point needs to learn it and study it. So I don't want it to be too prejudicial. I haven't quite even thought how to communicate that we believe evolutionary theory is false. Yeah, but you need, that is the mainstream view. So,
well, I mean, obviously, the young Earth creationists are going to say that, in general, evolution is going to be false because, again, they don't believe common ancestry goes back 5 billion years, but even creationists have to agree there has to be allelic frequency changes. There has to be variation in order to have speciation events, which most young Earth creationists I run into do not deny speciation. They just don't believe it as macro.
But ironically,
in order to do that,
one irony.
I think their choice of words just has to be better.
Okay, time out.
Because the end goal is
a lot of overtalk.
It's a lot of lag here. So
I feel like we need to go in order. So, Steve, do you want to just be like 1, 2, 3, 4?
Yeah, I'll just generally like run the thing because we have about a second delay, which is why we have overlap on the VMix call because people from different locations. So okay, so Sal, I'm gonna go ahead and finish your thought on that because I think you're exactly right on that. That again, there's different ways of looking at evolution through a young Earth creationist eyes and then an old Earth creationist eyes, but all of them have to recognize that there is variation in species. Speciation does occur. To deny that is most young Earth creationists I know don't deny that. What do you think on that? So,
well, I can't say that I've totally resolved how we're going to teach this to kids. So that's the first thing. But as a young Earth creationist, I do believe in balanced views. Give each side a chance to articulate their case.
Mm-hmm.
So
can I ask?
Maybe the way to say it is the creationists don't believe that evolution is true. That might be a fair statement. You're not making a judgment call. You're actually stating a fact.
That is true.
Christian creationists don't believe in evolution. That's just,
I'm not quite sure I would agree with that. I think they believe in evolution to a certain extent. I would say that they deny common ancestry.
Yeah.
That would be, I think, more specific. Dr. McLatchie, do you think that is kind of a better way to put it? Because an evolutionist, a creationist who says there is no such thing as evolution, there's no young Earth creationist model that exists without some form of evolution. Even in barrenology,
right?
And there has to be some kind of evolution. It has to be.
I'm aware of any creationist view which would deny that there's some form of evolution. There's actually an irony because of course with the idea that's popular among young Earth creationists of this global flood, there's pressure on creationist organizations such as Answers in Genesis and Institute for Creation Research to downplay the number of animals that would have been on the ark because there's the common objection that's made to young Earth creationists: how did Noah get all the animals on the ark? And so Answers in Genesis, for example, say that there may have been as few as 8,000 individual animals on board Noah's Ark. But then that raises another potentially even more perplexing problem of how do you get from 8,000 individual animals to modern biodiversity in 4,500 years? And so a creationist model that denies evolution in some sense, of course, is non-viable for that reason. And actually, creationists, ironically, end up being the most committed to a very, very high rate of evolution, more so than would be granted by most evolutionary biologists. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you have to explain millions and millions of species, extant species that have came about in the last 7,000 years, where an evolutionist would have 4.5 billion years to do that.
Well, it's
so
not
it
even
is a much
actually
more
creation
accelerated
species are a problem, but you've also got a whole huge social and human problem of human population and societies and social structures that also need to come about in a very, very, very short period of time.
And actually, they have much shorter than 6,000 years. They only have 4,500 years because that's when they think the flood happened.
Right, exactly.
That's a
and
fair
then
point.
you've got
that's a lot of speciation.
The flood and then Egypt and Exodus.
Real quick,
I wonder if anyone's
Dave
ever tried to.
Good.
Yeah, and the problem is you don't even have the 5,000 years. The problem is you only have a few decades, centuries at best, because a couple later you're at the time of Abraham, and we have from the time of Abraham pretty much all of extant biodiversity well represented in art and literature. So you have to squeeze all these speed events in only a few decades. That is simply impossible. And with their definition of evolution, the problem is they never actually define means by lower forms of life. What exactly does that mean? And they the very next word evolve, they define that as to develop from a lower form of life to a higher form of life. They seem to have an idea of evolution, a lateral progression from something that is going something higher and higher. But we know that that is simply not how evolution works. It is more of a branching tree and not a lateral climbing up of life. And that is something that I find deeply dramatic.
Do you think that it's possible, and this is for the whole panel, does the panel think that it might be possible for a young earth creationist to accept evolution and just view it as like an explosion that happened after the ark, or like an explosion of lots of varying different kinds that just pop all at once?
Dapper,
I mean,
you
that
wanna
seems
answer
to
that
be
one?
the AIG. That seems to be the AIG model, at the very least. And like Neff said, when we know that extant biodiversity, in fact, higher than current extant biodiversity, was around by the time of like the Old Kingdom in Egypt, which means that by the time Abraham comes around, we're at more than modern biodiversity. So that is essentially, we're talking about like litters of offspring in some organisms, where each member of the litter is a different species in order to get us to that point.
Yeah, so I remember looking something along with the line of pachyderms and this was when I was reading, about that particular topic, that it had required a speciation event every generation, or every other generation at the very least.
It's every pregnancy for several years.
Yeah, every pregnant, and so I mean you talk about hyper accelerated speciation. Jonathan, you were saying something
and then,
about another problem. One sec, Dave. David. Jonathan was saying something before about there was an additional problem. I kind of wanted to hear what that was, but I don't know if he finished his thought on that.
Oh, I think I finished that one. That was just the one about the flood and getting to modern species about biodiversity within a very, very short period of time. And by the way, also relating to that, V made the point about what about a creationist that comes up with this ad hoc postulate that you get this very, very rapid species diversification post-flood. And I would draw a distinction, I think, between showing that evidence can be made consistent with your view versus showing that your view is not being disconfirmed by the evidence. Because the way that I would define evidence as a card-carrying Bayesian would be something is evidence for your hypothesis if and only if that data is more expected or more probable, given your hypothesis is true, versus the falsehood thereof. And in the case of the explosion of the global species biodiversity within such a short time frame, that is much more predicted on the falsehood of young Earth creationism than it is on the truth, and therefore it counts as evidence against it, even if you can invoke a very improbable ad hoc postulate to try and explain or account for that data.
Yeah, no, and I happen to agree with you on a Bayesian approach. I mean, and that's one thing we should ask Sal. I mean, Sal, most of us. I mean, I'm not a true Bayesian in that form, but I mean, I do think Bayesian analysis is a very effective means of belief formation. And so, I mean, Dr. McLatchie is extremely correct when he's talking about Bayesian analysis and having prior information to disconfirm things that would probably not be the case based upon low priors for your posterior. So, if we expect certain things to be the case based upon what we observe and what we expect to observe, if life had only been around for 6,000 or 7,000 years, have you ever looked at a Bayesian approach to say, hey, look, this is not within what we have as an expectation for the evidence. The evidence is more disconfirming than it is confirming based upon the hypothesis that the Earth is only 7,000 years old as opposed to several billion years old.
Absolutely.
Well,
and when
I've never actually applied Bayesian stuff, but I have worked on the genetic entropy problem and also the sensitivity of mutations, of proteins to mutations. One concession I got out of evolutionists, even professors of evolutionary biology, is that there's no common ancestry among proteins. They're independent forms. It's like an orchard. And I said, okay, so you're willing to give up common ancestry there. You could see where this can go if you're willing to extrapolate it. So to me, that is disconfirming evidence of evolution. So I think notwithstanding all the complaints about the young Earth creation model, there are also major complaints with the evolution model. And so we're kind of in a situation we're not able to resolve. Protein that I study is the topoisomerase 2 alpha. I see things that don't make sense in terms of an evolutionary model, particularly the prokaryote-eukaryote transition. And I built phylogenetic trees, and there's stuff that's just lost. So it goes both ways, that there are things that are just devastating to evolutionary theory that they don't have explanations for. So
let's ask about that real quick.
Model doesn't, go on. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm kind of curious because when it comes to proteomics, and you're saying there's no common ancestry, and it is more maybe like an orchard or bush approach, but even in certain proteomics, when you have certain proteins, they still have the same functions in almost all eukaryotes. I mean, even cytochrome C, if I remember correctly, and I'm going way back my biology here, so I'm going to ask 2 experts in biology, or 3 experts in biology here. Well, actually 4. All you guys have a background in biology. What am I talking about? Jess and I are the 2 people going, yeah, we're whatever. We had biology years ago. But I mean, from what I understand about biology, in proteomics, cytochrome C in about 48% of eukaryotes, or 40% can be changed as far as amino acids, and it still has the same function. I have variation from historical cytochrome C proteins and other extinct species. So when we have a particular protein, it does the same function almost ubiquitously, and it can be traced back to the mutations, can be traced back using proteomics through phylogenetics. So when you say there's no common ancestry, I'm kind of wondering what you mean by that.
Let me clarify. Sorry about the delay. I'm not trying to.
Yeah, no, I know. No, it's VCall. We've all.
The first thing is the orchard model. Yeah, the orchard model is that we've actually taken all the major protein families. You can put them through a hidden Markov examination, and it won't come up with a unification. That's the first thing. And actually, when I've had shows where I actually showed the different architectures of protein, and the evolutionists like Professor Cardinal will say, no, there's no common ancestral gene or protein for these. Now, with regard to the commonality across, I'm sorry?
They could have arose. Could they have arisen independently? The amino acid chain?
Well, yes, they could have, and that looks very much like the creationist model. But there's a subtlety here where you said about cytochrome being across species. The topoisomerase is also across both prokaryotic and eukaryotic species, but there's a difference. There are these things called localization signals in the eukaryotic form across all the proteins. All of those would have to be reformatted. All the proteins common to a prokaryote that you see in a eukaryote would have to be formatted. It would be deadly to try to attempt this all at once. It will not happen by point mutations. And this is something creationists are not putting on the table. That's why I got hired to find arguments like this. So, I've thrown that up on the screen. I've in my debates, and the biologists on the other side just fooled. I said, yeah, I caught you this time. You can't use your phylogenetic methods on this, even though they look similar in terms of percentages as you're talking about amino acid substitutions, you'll find these regions that are so critical, it'd be lethal to try to evolve it. And you have to do this simultaneously. I'd sooner, and I've shared this with some, evolutionists who are Christian. One evolutionist is a Christian. He became a creationist within 1 hour. So there's subtle arguments most creationists don't make, and that's one I'm just throwing out. That this is novel, and I'd be happy to get feedback on it. I've never been challenged on it. So I agree with you. There are problems with the young Earth model, but to pretend the evolutionary model is not without serious problems, I would also have a problem with that. I didn't completely come up with that argument. There's a professor of molecular biology at a secular school. She's Harvard trained, UPenn trained. She teaches at a secular school. She's a young Earth creationist. She knows the difference between the eukaryote and prokaryote. She's very good at this, and that I have to credit her. She's changed hand.
Okay, so I'm gonna get Dr. McLatchie in this on that one, because again, this is probably much more along his area of expertise than it would be. Dave, do you want to say something first, Dave?
Yeah, before you go, I actually do have a question from Dr. McLatchie. I know you're a part of the intelligent design movement. I know others in the old Earth creationist intelligent design movement, like Dr. Michael Behe, accept universal common ancestry. I was just kind of curious if you accept universal common ancestry, or what your take on that is.
Absolutely, I can answer that. Just for clarification, I would hesitate to use the expression intelligent design movement, because that implies as like a political movement. As a more intelligent design research community, I think is a better phrase. But in terms of my view on universal common descent, I certainly think that there's some compelling evidence and a compelling case that can be made for common descent. I'm not completely sold on universal common descent. I think there's still some debate there to be had, but I certainly think that there appears to be a lot of common ancestry that is true. Now, as an intelligent design theorist, I think that there are some really serious scientific challenges to the neo-Darwinian view of evolution and natural selection as being the driving force behind evolution. I think that they're demonstrably inadequate to explain, in particular, irreducibly complex nanomachines that we find in the realm of biology. Now, and I also think that the fossil record documents explosions in the history of life, where we see very abrupt transitions. The most famous, of course, being the Cambrian explosion that Steve McRae wrote a book about called Darwin's Doubt. But there are many other explosions in the history of life as documented by the fossil record as well. And once you start to move away from that gradualistic Darwinian paradigm of evolution and natural selection and start to move towards a more teleological view, I think the boundary line between special creation and common descent starts to become rather less well defined. Because you could imagine, for instance, I think it would be a legitimate position to take, that God or designer creates new forms of life using genome of a previous type of animal as a template for the synthesis of a new life form. I think that's a legitimate view that one can take. So that would be consistent in some sense with special creation and consistent in some sense with common descent. I'm curious what your perspective would be on that, or if you have any objections to that idea.
No, it'll be interesting to talk about. Dr. McLatchie, I actually do want to invite you on my channel, if you don't mind. Talk to me on intelligent design and all of that. So I have a good friend, Dr. Dan, who is probably listening, and I know he would love to have a conversation with us.
We love Dr. Dan.
I saw him in chat.
Oh yeah,
he's great.
Yeah, he's great. My Unfinished Journey for $5 says proteins not having common ancestry is confirmation that it's not turtles all the way down. Things had to start somewhere. So going back to the proteomics again, and by the way, so I do agree. There's certain proteins that if you have a wrong amino acid substitution, it's going to be harmful. I mean, obviously you have prions, you have things that happen where it's not going to have the desired function. But for the most part, some proteins are pretty resilient that you can have, a substantial amount of amino acid change, and it still does its intended function.
I do have a little bit of a question, maybe just for clarification. Evolution, how much of like the evolutionary theory as we know it, or as fairly standard in biology class, is actually talking about the evolution of proteins? From my understanding, most of the argumentation around young Earth creationism tends to lean towards the evolution of like fish, animals, birds, like already established animals, is not so much talking about the chemistry of the matter. So I'm just not sure if we've actually jumped topics a little bit, or if we're just in a very niche portion of the topic.
Niche, because proteomics still needs to be explained.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
I was just
if I
curious
could
about
just-
where we've ended
yeah.
up here, following the thread.
Well-
Welcome to Non Sequitur. You know where you're at, V?
Yeah.
I'm an unorthodox. Well, I'm an unorthodox young Earth creationist.
I can tell already.
I
Yeah,
don't
you're one of the
use-
very
I
few
don't
that
like
actually
most
says,
of their-
have
I
a
don't
real
like most
good
of their
education.
arguments.
You don't
Yeah.
think
And
that
so- and
octopus
Sal-
are better than birds?
Yeah. And Sal, I will say that I really do appreciate your honesty. I really do appreciate you willing to say these are not good arguments. I do have immense respect for you. So I'm glad to call you a friend. And I'm really
Speaking of
glad
which,
that we were able to get to meet.
oh, sorry. Dave, speaking of which, did you send what you sent to me to V?
What was that?
The rest
No,
of
I
those
haven't
photos
done
you
it
sent
yet.
to me, I don't have the ability to really download them because it's really hard from a DM. What you sent to me, those photos, can you send those to V and we can go through
Send
them
them to
some
me.
more? Because I mean, Sal's argument is a lot more technical, and it's one of those technical arguments that we just don't have the scope to get into right now. I think those are really great arguments. Actually, I think proteomics is something that's important to talk about when you're going to talk about evolution, because we need to explain where these proteins came from. We want to explain how the ribosome made these amino acid chains to do what the protein's supposed to do. Matter of fact, it's kind of interesting that ribosomes are still protein structure based. I mean, it's one of those people that I brought up the chicken and egg kind of problem, which I don't think there actually is. But Sarfati argues, even ribosomes are a chicken and egg problem. Andrew Hill Fidar says, ACE 9th grade biology uses Loch Ness monster against evolution. Oh, we're getting there, Andrew Hill. We are definitely getting there.
I think this is a lot of this is a topic for another show, so we can expand more upon this. I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, let's start these arguments first. Do you want to show that one article, Loch Ness, before he sent you other things? Kawasa 10,001. What he was talking about, I sent you a link on that. Kawasa 10,001 said, "I'm getting a wave of nostalgia and a sense of continuation with this stream. Welcome back, Non Sequitur. Welcome guests. Now give us a dumpster fire." Oh, they're coming. Don't worry, my friend. They're coming. But yes, Non Sequitur has always been a little bit discombobulated. It's kind of been the charm of the show. It's going to continue, I assure you. Look, my thing fell down.
Sal, you're a so-and-so, and they're dumpster fire.
Question for you. Are you on Twitter? Because I have them on my.
Yes.
Just to,
I sent you I sent you her Twitter. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I will be right back. My phone is in the other room. I will be right back.
While you're doing that, let me ask Jonathan. Jonathan, did you want to touch real quick then on the whole proteomic thing about why we would want to trace proteins back through phylogenetics and how they came about, whether they had some common ancestry, whether they came about individually, through other, I mean, obviously it's just a chain of amino acids. So, I mean, you can have peptides form and they may not have formed the same way from the same genes, whatever. I mean, would that not be the case?
Yeah, so I don't necessarily have a problem with the idea of common ancestry of proteins. I think that certainly if you're trying to explain it naturalistically by a Darwinian process, I think that's where you run into problems. I think that Doug Axe is really onto something with his work on protein structures. You probably are familiar with that, published in the Journal of Molecular Biology, most famously in 2004. There's also been other work subsequent to that, which has tended to confirm Axe's work. But the idea was that protein structures seem to be highly rare in sequence space. So if you imagine, there's 20 different amino acids that are used in proteins, and say you have a sequence of amino acids which is 150 amino acids in length. Well, that is the combinatorial space. The number of possible ways there are for arranging those amino acids then is 20 raised to the 150th power, of course, many of those are functional, but many of those are also gibberish. And we know that in the English language, sentences convey meaning and communicate to us because, and precisely because, in virtue of the fact that there's an astronomically small rarity of functional, meaningful sentences. There's far more ways of writing gibberish than there are ways of writing meaningful sentences that communicate and convey meaning. And likewise, the same appears to be true with respect to protein structures, that there's far more ways of stringing amino acids together to spell out gibberish than there are ways of that will allow the protein to collapse into a three-dimensional structure. And so how do you explain that by a blind search? Because natural selections can only see function once it's already been acquired. And so you have to rely a lot on chance to actually get these protein structures. And then the problem, of course, is compounded, and the problem grows exponentially when we're dealing with molecular machinery, such as the DNA replication machinery, for example, where you have to have multiple proteins that are working together in concert and have to be very specifically crafted in order to work together to accomplish a higher level objective. So I think that's the key issue that causes me doubts about the Darwinian method.
So, all right. So again, we're going into more topic stuff, but we're going to be getting back to the original ACE stuff here in a second. But so just so we clarify, so the intelligent design would probably say like something along the lines of nonsense mutation. So let's say you have a nonsense mutation and you have a single base pair. It has a stop codon. Now that protein is no longer functional because of a nonsense mutation, or let's say that the protein has some kind of amino acid substitution that prevents conformational changes for it to be, formed into a tertiary or quaternary structure to do what it's supposed to do. You're arguing that Darwinian evolution itself doesn't explain those types of things, or why we have functional proteins in eukaryotes, something along those lines.
Right. So the design
evolution is archaic. I don't think most people would refer to things as Darwinian evolution. Even there's a neo-Darwinism. Even that I think is a little bit defunct. But for the most part, Darwinian evolution has things that Darwin got wrong. But I mean, the whole principle behind the Darwinian evolution is that it can be supposedly explained teleonomically without some kind of intelligent guidance to it. It's just, natural selection at play through natural explanations. But Chesha, did Dave send you those things?
Yep, I've got everything right here. I also have
Let's
our
do
lovely Nessie as evidence. So which one would you guys want to go with? Do you want to go with the Loch Ness Monster? Or do you want to go into the book?
This is Sal. Sal, what do you want? You want the book or Loch Ness? Because he probably hasn't seen the Loch Ness.
I was still hung up on about the octopus and the bird, which is more
that's the
complex.
workbook. That's the
All right,
workbook.
let's go back to the book. Let's go back to the work. We're going to listen to the younger creationist here. Let's go back to the book. And I haven't seen this, so this is news to me.
So this is the very first. I should kind of go through this so you guys can understand a little bit more what's going on. So this is kind of like the outline that the workbook is going to be using. Each workbook, there's a theme, and there's also a scripture verse. Everyone has to learn a memory verse in every single workbook. So if you scroll down a little bit.
See, but this is not biology. This is church. That part right there is not based upon
exactly.
biology. It's based upon church.
Yes, exactly the thing. They mix every single book, no matter what the subject, whether it be math, social science, or the Bible, whatever. Everything has to go back to the Bible. Everything has a Bible memory verse that you have to memorize throughout the piece. So this is kind of like what you are expected to learn. And this workbook is 59 pages. For obvious reasons, I did not send the whole 59 pages. I'm just going to send like the first, because that's just going to be way too much to cover in one show. And you can kind of see exactly where they're going to try to go. If you want, go over to the next, a lot of stuff that I want to kind of cover on the next page. So throughout these,
oh my God,
textbooks, there are different. So if it looks like a comic book, that's because it kind of is a comic book as well.
This reminds me of a chick track.
Yes, it is basically. Yes, that is a good way to put it. It's a big, long church chick track. That is actually a very good way of putting it. Basically, there are two characters. There are characters throughout the book and throughout the accelerated Christian education.
The guy waving is breaking the meta for me. It's not that we've got real people and we've got cartoon people mixed in together. It's the guy staring in the center of the page, directly staring at me.
The one guy in the trench coat. I like him. He's a stare. Yeah, exactly.
I also like one of our characters is Wendy's older brother, apparently. From Wendy's burger place.
Oh my goodness! Come on, Jonathan. Come on, this is funny, Jonathan. Crack a smile, Jonathan. There we go. Okay, so what is this actually trying to say, Dave?
So basically, this is just storyline. It's basically in order, instead of having kids read a dry, boring textbook, it kind of helps move the story along, not so dry and all. And
let's go to the science exhibits.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is the type of stuff you see in throughout the piece. and I will give them credit for racial
The artwork's not
visibility.
bad and it's inclusive.
But,
Yeah,
but
sure,
the
I'll
problem
give 'em that.
is, but the problem is, there's like the white kids and the black kids and the Asian kids, and they all go to 3 separate church schools. So you can draw your own conclusions.
Wait,
there.
what? Wait, what?
Oh,
No, you can't just get it.
I see.
You can't just throw that out there. I need explanation on that one.
Yeah. So there is racial visibility, which is good racial representation. But if you actually go through their, at least it's changed since I went there. But since when I went there were like 3 separate schools. The white kids went to one church, black kids went to another church, Asian kids went to another church. So there were 3 separate.
That's horrible.
Yeah. So
little bit lighter note. This guy right here, top right, meme potential. That's a meme right there. Snapshot that and put different text in it. That's a meme.
Yes. And yeah, it's really embarrassing. So that reminds me. There's one thing
It's very inclusive segregations. Don't question it.
Yes.
It's fine.
Is there like any quiz sections or anything?
Just fill in the
yeah,
blanks.
Funny if I would. It'd be funny if I started to flunk some of the exams.
Yeah, so you can see there are actually sections after every little reading section there are questions. The problem is that you can find all these questions with a quick skim of the text. You don't actually have to really read and understand the text. So what these workbooks are really teaching you to do is just skim through the workbook to find the answers. They're not actually teaching you anything at all, but search for the answers and move on. That's pretty much all what it is.
Well, let's look at these definitions then real quick, Dave. All right, so the assumption we went through: atheist, a person who denies existence as God. By the way, I actually agree with that fully.
Yeah, and I do agree. I agree with that definition also.
One out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're at 8, and we've got 1 out of 8 that we agree with so far.
All right, let's go. Hang on. I'm gonna assign a value: 0, 0.5, and 1. 0.5 is in, 1 is correct, 0 I would say false. So first one I'm gonna give 0.5. Second one, yeah, that's a 1. I agree with that. The third one, to decay, degenerate. There's a lot more complexity with degenerate, like degenerate matter, but basically when something degenerates, it decays. I mean, what do you guys think? Jonathan, would you? Again, this is 8th grade. I'm trying to frame it in 8th grade. Degenerate, decay, but of course I use the word degenerate means a lot of things at different domains. Like degenerate matter doesn't mean it's decayed. It just means that it's
a degenerate person who watches bad anime.
So I would probably give this like a 0.5.
Yeah. The next one, entropy, that's actually spot on. I have no issue with that definition whatsoever.
I'm actually really surprised they actually got the definition of entropy.
Should we maybe read the definitions out for the audience, guys?
Oh, sure. Oh,
okay.
We have people. Wait, are you guys watching this? I thought, are we live? I didn't know we went live. Entropy, the amount of energy no longer available for use after a chemical or physical process has been applied. And that's basically what entropy is, unusual energy in a system. That's a very simple way of putting it, but that's correct.
Yeah, that's a good definition for an 8th grade textbook.
I'm actually surprised.
Yep.
Maybe we should all study ACE, Jonathan, would you agree that that's not a bad definition?
Do you mean the definition of evolution?
Entropy. No, entropy.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yes, I would agree with the definition of entropy.
Yeah. Evolution, this one is a pure failure. I mean, pure zero. The false theory that assumes that all forms of life develop by lower forms of life. Sal, I mean, even as a young creationist, they're making assumptions here without even explaining what evolution is, because evolution is a very complicated topic. It's not just a theory. It has a lot of explanatory power for certain. Even creationists need evolution to exist to explain biodiversification in their own models. So to say that it's just a false theory it just begs the question there.
I think if you're going to give a definition, let evolutionists give that definition. You can comment elsewhere that you think it's false. But
you know what? And I respect that.
The right thing to do is to equip them with a definition that's accepted.
I also think there's a little bit of a problem here if you notice that the evolution definition uses the their version of assumed. So I think what Dapper was saying beforehand is correct. In that,
that's Dapper, you make a point. Yeah.
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 Also, the layout of this is giving me a headache because there should be at least spaces between these so you can differentiate and follow the line of where one definition stops and the other one begins. Because there's no capitals, there's no periods, and there's no spacing, and I don't like it. It's hard to read.
I do have to say something about entropy. If that's true, then I actually learned something today, because when I studied statistical mechanics and thermodynamics, they didn't give us that definition. Ours was, entropy is KB times the logarithm of the number of microstates
omega,
or Cauchy's interval.
Yeah, I mean, this is for eighth grade. I mean, obviously, entropy is clearly, it's based upon the logarithm of the omega, which is your microstates, right? Times the Boltzmann constant. Everyone here has had physics. Even V probably knew that. But she's smarter than people think. But when you're dealing with, 5th, 8th grade, you're not going to get into the mathematical formula or what going to be, explaining what entropy is at a very, very complicated, thermodynamics point of view.
No-go.
So I learned something.
To say there's just unusual energy is actually fine.
So I learned something today. I actually learned something from this 8th grade book. So I have at least one good thing. I'm telling you, we're all going to become creationists now. Yay. Well, here's the thing. I try to believe that everything out there, at least maybe, has something you might glean some value of. But then again, you have to take things that's holistically and overall, because just because something has something correct in it doesn't mean that the rest of the information is correct. All right. So evolve to develop gradually from a lower form of a higher form. I disagree with that fully. That's not what evolution means. Sal, I'm going to give you my personal stipulative definition of evolution.
That's like
it's derivative,
evolution.
Yeah,
Pokemon
but I want you to say what you think of my version. Okay, so I define evolution as a change of allelic frequency or heritable traits from from any given population of species from one generation to the next generation over time.
Yes, that is my definition as well. I think that is a solid definition.
Want me to repeat it?
No, I actually don't. Yeah, I actually don't have a definition of evolution. I like change over time. That's easy.
Well, but it's specifically a change of allelic frequency or heritable traits, right? I mean,
Steve, this is a grade 8 textbook.
No, I get that. But I mean,
I tend,
Jonathan,
I tend to just, I tend to use the word common. I use the word common descent, common descent when I'm trying to critique something specifically, because that's what distinguishes creationism from.
I do believe in evolutionary theory we should use common descent, because I believe it's the way I explain it. I explain it as modern evolutionary synthesis combined with descent with modification.
It kind of looks like they added that into mutation, though. Like, it sounds like they've kind of added the second half of the frequency changes in the mutation area.
All right, let's go to that one. Habit, we'll skip inhabit. What does mutation say, V?
A variation in an organism caused by changes in its gene structure.
I think that's a good definition. I would give that a 1.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I mean, it's obviously 8th grade, but sure. I mean, a mutation would be obviously some kind of change in the DNA where you have a nucleotide that has been substituted or base pair that has been substituted. But I mean, or a bunch of them, right? For an indel. So you don't like that for mutation?
Nope. I like change in a change in nucleotides in the genome, because a lot of action is in the non-coding regions. Non-gene.
No, that's
actually similar to my objection. My thing is the first phrase, a variation in an organism, makes it sound like you're saying that there's always going to be a change in phenotype when you have that change in the genotype, which is not true.
Agreed. Yeah, I mean, if you have a mutation in a non-coding protein or a protein that's not transcribed, what difference is it going to make?
And now we get to do the quiz. Do you guys want to do the quiz?
Yay! All right.
One other thing. There's also synonymous codons. If you switch between one synonymous codon and another, it also, other than having a tiny effect in the activation energy for transcription, other than that, it's going to have essentially no change at all.
The protein's going to do the same function.
Yeah, and that activation energy is such a tiny thing that it's rarely selected for.
I do enjoy, in the right over here is he is a rock, his work is perfect. Explain to Elmo. Explain to Elmo how Rock is doing work. How Rock can be perfect. He's a rock.
I will never get it. I have never loved Sesame Street so much in my life until Elmo recently has been going off on Rocco. That has been one of the greatest things ever. But anyways, if you guys haven't seen that, we'll explain it later. But yes, Elmo fight against Rocco is great. But all right, let's take the quiz. Let's take the quiz. Avi, challenge us.
All right, question number 1. They filled it in already. They're using cursive though. That's kind of cool.
I will say that
did not believe in God.
I will say that as a person, accelerated Christian education did teach me how to write cursive, and it forced me to write exclusively in cursive, and I still write exclusively in cursive today.
That's great. I write in cursive as well.
Yep. But if there's one thing that I will say about ACE is that it taught me cursive. So
it taught me cursive. That's something.
It taught me how to curse. All right. So the first one's kind of a give me. We'll all agree about that one, sure.
All right.
Although you notice they switch it up. Wait, hang on. You notice they switch it up. They went from atheism is a denial or belief God does not exist to somebody who just doesn't believe in God. So they kind of switched that up. But whatever. We'll let that slide. All right, 2. Go ahead.
The Earth did blank because of the fall.
Probably
degenerate.
Degenerate. All right.
I would say degenerate.
Are we gonna let chat try and fill in the blanks?
No, they're just following along. It's too much of a delay.
Fine.
Screw the chat. We're having fun.
I more meant are we gonna give them a second to no or not? Okay.
I mean, they already have the numbers and the blanks. They can just put in numbers and answers.
Okay. Over 1,000 people blank the tiny island. Do not put swear words in here.
It's inhabit, but I don't understand what this really has to do with much to inhabit. I mean, we're talking obviously about geological things for biology. Obviously, I mean, what is it called?
They're planning on using inhabit later on in this chapter, so they need to make sure the kids know what it is. I don't.
Oh, okay.
When you're talking about little school kids, sometimes the vocabulary words you have to give them sometimes aren't super related.
I know. Well, I'm not expecting them to know what allopatric speciation is. Okay, I mean, if an 8th grader knows what allopatric speciation is, I'm going to let him on the show and he's going to be talking to us.
I feel like this is insulting to 8th graders. The change in gene structure caused a blank.
It's going to be mutation, but that's backwards.
Yeah.
His blank about evolution.
Wait. Dapper makes a very good point on number 4. A change in gene structure caused mutation is completely backwards. A mutation caused a change in the gene structure.
You know,
it's legit backwards.
I didn't even catch that until you mentioned it. I guess that just shows you more on how awful this really is.
It sounds cringy. It sounds going, oh no, that's not how it works.
Yeah, a change in the gene structure caused a mutation. No, come on.
It made Jonathan laugh finally. He's like, wait, what?
And even it's not even even backwards. It's a little weird because it's like those are the same thing, right? A mutation is a change in the gene structure.
Is a change, right?
The gene structure
by definition,
so it's not even that one causes the other. It's just like they're synonyms.
It's not even by definition. It's that that's what they told us.
This has some issues. Okay. Jonathan, do you want to add anything on that?
Who was the editor?
So who is the editor? So that's
I completely agree
with Van Gundy. I bet it's Kim Van Gundy.
I can find the editors on this because Jonathan was asking me earlier, and I couldn't get any response on who actually wrote this because you couldn't find who wrote it. But I mean, all right. So what's the next one? Number 5.
Number 5. His blank about evolution proved to be incorrect.
Assumption. Choice from again?
Assumption. Yeah.
Oh, assumption. Okay. Yeah.
Steve's already lost.
Where are we?
So they define.
I can't get past number 4. Sorry. What?
They defined assumption earlier as an undemonstrated or unevidenced something that is assumed, something considered true without benefit of evidence. So they define assumption as something which is absent evidence, and I disagree with that definition because I think that assumptions can be supported by evidence.
I agree.
And then they also define evolution. They define evolution as a false theory. Well, that's not part of the definition of evolution. So they load the die in their favor.
Just a little bit.
Quite heavily here.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, I would never define young Earth creationism by starting with the false belief, even though I do think it is false.
They're all
that would be horrible of me.
gray Jedi
Right.
played by Liam Neeson who's just using the Force to cheat at dice.
Yeah, look, I obviously disagree with younger creationism, but I would never define younger creationism as the false belief, blah, 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 because that just begs the question. I mean, that doesn't explain to somebody why I disagree with younger creationism. That's silly.
There's no need for your judgment call to come into a definition of an idea.
Well, I think that's what Sal was saying initially, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I agree with Sal on that.
Number 6, blank increases whenever chemical and physical processes are applied to energy.
Entropy,
yeah, because in any thermodynamic system, you're always going to have some form of loss that has unusable energy. So you can never have a what's called open unity or a perfect system where you have no
it depends how you're defining your system.
Process.
All right, you two need to save that.
In a perfect non-reversible
hold on.
thermodynamic
you
system.
two need to hold that until Landon is
Listen,
here
Nuke.
next week.
Listen, Nuke.
Next week.
We'll have it out.
Okay,
Landon
listen, I'm going to say that there are open, closed, and isolated systems, and how entropy acts in all of those is going to vary. For instance,
I
Earth,
agree.
It's technically open, but it's primarily a closed system, which means entropy doesn't have to increase on Earth.
I feel like you guys didn't hear me. We need to save this.
We'll get into what's called ratcheting later on, and that there's only one isolated system that exists. One.
I think that's a terrible question. I don't think it makes any sense. We can apply a physical process and freeze a mouse, and the mouse is going to lose entropy as it dies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's oddly worded. I'll give you that. It is kind of oddly worded.
Everything in this is oddly worded.
That's why we're reading it.
Is a perfectly fine.
Number 7. Some scientists wrongly assume life did blank from lower organisms.
Hey, scientists are wrong. Some scientists,
all right. 8. Blank is the false theory that all life developed from a lower life
That's just the definition. That's not an example. That's just the definition. Stop it.
Man.
I can't anymore.
All right.
Well, this is what happens when you have people that are, and this is to me a form of indoctrination. They're not learning biology. They're learning a very contorted, very twisted form of science that's not science any longer. This is not science. This is religious indoctrination.
And one thing I'll say here also is, as a Christian, I cringe because this sets up young people to lose their faith.
Oh yeah.
Because
you're giving them. You're absolutely right. Yep.
Right,
exactly. You're giving them a cardboard.
Time out. Let the doctor
ahead,
finish.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
You're giving them a cardboard sword to go into a gunfight.
Absolutely right. Yep. Yeah, and I will say this before Dave I will say I do not want people to think that this is reflective of Christianity. Okay,
no.
It's not. This is not. Has nothing to do with Christianity. It doesn't have anything to do with people's beliefs, whether God exists or not, or Christ was the Son of God, or whatever. Nothing to do with any of that. We're not even making any kind of correlation. It should not be used in any way to reflect upon Christianity. Okay, because every single Christian I know would denounce this right off the bat, pretty much. I mean, it's
Doctor,
it's that awful.
I have a question for you. It's a technical question. Do you think cardboard swords are better or worse than those tubes that come with wrapping paper around them?
I've never used either of them to hit someone, so I have no idea.
You've never hit anybody with one of those cardboard tubes? You're missing out.
It's time for cardboard tube fencing.
Right? Oh yeah, what?
You have
special in-person NSS episode.
Well, I guess you guys know what you guys are doing next time you go for.
He's got one right there.
The gauntlet has been thrown.
Oh my gosh! These are great, man. Those are great. All right, Dave, go ahead and finish your thought, then we can move on, Dave.
Yeah, my vote is for this thing. My thought here is that if I were an 8th grader and in fundamentalist Christian education, reading these textbooks, and then if I were to have gone home and fact-checked it, I could have fact-checked this and found 5 minutes that the whole entire thing was a lie from start to finish. I would feel that I was insulted with my intelligence. I would feel that they are being disrespectful to my time as a student, and it would probably cause me to pretty much question pretty much everything else they ever taught me as well. Because if I go home and I can easily show why every single one of these things is just complete nonsense, well, perhaps the whole thing is just a house of cards.
I can't really
You know,
blame
Dave,
some
Good.
online atheists and some online, or not even just online, people for if they're coming out of a faith being angry, if this is the faith they're coming from. Because I think it's totally fair to feel like you've been lied to. And yeah, it is like very hyperbolic to say like, oh, well, if you believe in Christianity, you're lying to everybody around you. And I can see where it's coming from, though, because they're being lied to. That doesn't mean everybody, but it is like maybe slow your roll, but it's at least understandable.
But this actually happened. This actually happened to a friend of mine, Wayne Fillmore. I had debated him on macroevolution. I gave him all the scientific, knowledge he needed to at least recognize that macroevolution was a real thing. He immediately went out to look into it himself. A month later, he had realized that what he was taught about evolution was in error. It was inaccurate, and he fundamentally left young creationism by fiat. He stopped associating with Kent Hovind. He had nothing to do with young creation anymore. He got so much flack for it, but one, he's never looked back, and two, he's angry that he was lied to for a long time. Though he felt he was lied to, and that he did not get the proper education that he should have gotten. Now he has now, and he actually in science teaching. But you're right, he was angry because anybody who's had this kind of education has a right to be angry, and this is probably what the kind of education he kind of had, if I had to guess, right? So, all right. So, what do we got more on here?
Okay, so I want to point out the species. I think I don't have any problems with the others, but species here, they define it as a group of animals having common characteristics. This here is a really bad definition because you could go away thinking that humans, chimpanzees, bonobos, they're all the same species because we have lots of traits in common. This, of course, begs the question is how many similarities does it take in order to classify something the same species?
Everything
it's just a
pink
horrible
is
definition.
Everything pink is the same species.
Yeah, this is a really,
exactly.
really horrible definition. Now, granted, I mean, younger creationists argued. Matter of fact, a friend of mine who's a younger creationist I've known a very, very long time. She brought this up all the time. She brought it up on my page yesterday. Scientists can't even determine what a species is, and that's not quite correct. Now, there are 25, 26 something different things that can determine speciation, but it's a graduation. I mean, it's nothing like there's a hard line of demarcation most of the time from one species to another. But they have a general understanding of what they mean by speciation. They know that I am a different species than a cat because we have no ability to interbreed with each other. None, right? So that is at least a one way to determine whether a species is different from another species if there's just zero chance of any kind of interbreeding, whether pre-zygotic or post-zygotic. It doesn't matter. There's no way I could physically or not that I would, or biologically reproduce with like a cat, right? So there we have an understanding what we mean by species, but that definition there, it's meaningless because again, we have what do we have in common with a like a great ape, like an orangutan or a chimp that makes us the same species. We're not the same species, but we have almost everything in common. There's
everything
not that much
you
that differentiates us.
Is a very good point. However, I would like to point out that this says correct mistakes.
Correct mistakes.
X in the box indicates that all scoring is correct and complete. Score pages 3 and 4. X. Correct mistakes. X. Rescore. X. Have you corrected your mistakes? They're telling you you gotta go back.
It should be corrected mistakes then, not correct mistakes.
Okay, so I should kind of explain here that in the accelerated world, instead of teachers looking over their students' work, checking it, the students actually get up and check their own work. Which if you have a bunch of kids in a room getting to check their own work, you can kind of imagine what's. And so you go through, you get up, you actually have to ask the supervisor's permission. Hey, I got into this checkpoint, and you're not allowed to work past that checkpoint until you actually get your supervisor's permission to get up and check your work. And if you get anything wrong, you go back down, you fix your work, and then once you fix your work, you go up and ask your supervisor to go up and recheck your work.
That sounds very tedious.
Sounds very cool.
Yeah, and there's an obvious problem here is that if you get wrong, It doesn't really teach you to figure out why you got it wrong. It just really teaches you to look at the score book and says, okay, this is what the actual answer is. Okay, here's what it is. Okay, just scribble it out and rewrite it with the right answer. That is the problem that I have with this type of education.
I feel
like
like as
this-
a kid, I would have figured out.
You just cheat.
I feel like as a kid, I would have figured out very quickly that the quickest way for me to be done with my work for the day is to just write whatever in each box, then go check it. Say, oh, I got these wrong. Now that I have the real answers, fill in the real answers, go check it again and be like, well, problem solved.
I like this.
Problem,
Did you know?
problem solution. Go ahead, B. What?
Did you know evolutionists suppose that the elements found in nature were randomly placed together to form the basic building blocks that formed more complex living organisms, period?
I've never met an
not know
evolutionist
that.
snake that way. I did not know that. And by the way, this is I want to ask the audience so we get them to play along. What V is going to read here is a well-known fallacy. Can you name it?
British
First one who gets
astronomer
it gets a shout out.
British astronomer Sir Fred Hoyle said, quote, "The chance that higher life forms might have emerged through evolutionary processes is comparable with the chance that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard might assemble a Boeing 747 from the material therein." End quote. In other words, the probability is next to impossible. Tell me you don't know how probability works without telling me you don't know how probability works.
I actually like that Hoyle quote.
It's
why?
But okay, Hoyle
really,
wasn't
really
Hoyle wasn't a mathematician, but of course Hoyle is discounting very fundamental things. One of which, a junkyard is not a biological process. Two, a junkyard does not have natural selective pressures on it, right? It doesn't have any kind of thing to reproduce and change under under selective pressures. So this, I mean, sure, if you didn't have any kind of reproduction going on, you didn't have natural selection, you didn't have death, you didn't have birth, you didn't have any of those things and change of frequencies, then yeah, it would be a little bit stronger quote. But this quote is dealing with something that are non-biological entities. It's comparing apples and oranges.
Hold on, I want to hear from Sal why he likes this quote, because I have faith in Sal that his answer is going to be hilarious.
It's kind of a good metaphorical thing as metaphors go. It's not meant to be rigorous, but because I'd been working on the genetic entropy problem, which in that case, the word entropy is a little bit of a misnomer, but it's just such a cool word. And Dr. Sanford, if you're listening, please forgive me. So
yeah, no, I mean, I know. And look, I appreciate the fact that you do acknowledge that in Sanford's work, which I'm only tertiary familiar with, he's not using entropy in the chemical or physics type sense.
Well, in any case, so I like the metaphor. I use it a lot just to illustrate, and I do think natural selection. There are many cases natural selection actually prevents evolution because it would. Halfway changes could be lethal, and there are a lot of situations where quote unquote beneficial mutations are actually loss of function. That was Michael Behe's Darwin Devolves, and he actually got a peer-reviewed paper in the Quarterly Review of Biology that showed reductive evolution is the dominant mode in everything that we experiment. Experimental evolution and field observations. And there happens to be a paper by Eugene Koonin that says reductive evolution is the dominant mode. If we use kind of a looser definition, I think my spiel is that natural selection is overrated in the Darwinian view. What we actually see and observe and theoretically now can start to predict is actually loss of function. You can't circumvent the probability.
I'm not going to totally agree with you on natural selection, and I get a flack for that myself because I do think Photo makes some very good arguments. I'm not saying that they're great, but I think Photo makes some very good arguments, and natural selection doesn't really explain anything. And
I feel
biologists
like you can come up with a better analogy.
Yeah, biologists that really are hardcore biologists, like mostly the atheist biologists, they don't really know philosophy very well, so they don't understand the argument that Photo is making because he's a philosopher. He's not arguing natural selection doesn't occur. He's arguing natural selection is non-explanatory, and as a whole, natural selection is non-explanatory. And the way I use an analogy for that is I said, hey, look, V, I'm going to tell you how to make a lot of money. I'm going to give you the secret to making a lot of money. And you're like, okay, Steve, how do you do that? I'm like, buy low, sell high. Okay, that's true, but it doesn't tell you how to actually do it, right? Natural
Thanks,
selection
champ.
is the same thing. Now, Photo points out that natural selection always has to appeal to something else to explain observation. And I think he makes a very good valid point on that. So I think natural selection is non-explanatory, but I get a lot of flack for that too, Sal. Okay, so but all right, so where are we at here?
Okay, so this is basically, and if you actually read this, it definitely looks like more of a storyline. So I'm gonna pull up my book and see if I think I've made some notes of stuff that more evidence for. Go up actually to the second page, the page right next to it, because I want to point something out. It's on page number 6, the next image.
The
So if you
next
can-
one, sorry, you want this one?
Yeah, that one right. I want to highlight where you see assumption right here. This just really irritated me when I actually read this line.
Did this book cost? Does this booklet cost $3,500?
This was the worst. Like this
Okay.
individual workbook was like not even that.
Okay.
Secular scientists, as opposed to religious scientists. I love how they kind of use the word secular scientist. Have also tried to explain the origins of galaxies, stars, planets, the sun, and the Earth. Their ideas are often presented as scientific facts rather than theories. In many school textbooks, it is an assumption that evolution is a proven fact, when in reality, evolution is only a theory without any actual proof. That is just so irksome, and so irritating that it just like my intelligence is being insulted just by looking at it.
Well, what they're doing is they're using equivocation, because the word theory can mean different things. But in science, a theory is a well-substantiated body of evidence that explains observations and naturalistic explanations by naturalistic means. And so the theory has been time-tested. A theory has been confirmed to be a model that does make predictions, accurate predictions, that you can rely upon and explain. So a theory is more than just a guess. Theory in science is the highest you can get. In order to have a theory, you need things like facts. You need things like evidence. You need things like proofs. You need things that have substantiated time and time again that will be used to explain what we're observing. And so
look at what this says.
You have to have evidence for this, for theory.
But look at what this says. It says evolutionary model. There is no creator. Evolution doesn't say that.
There's nothing in evolution that says that.
This is actually a good Strawman.
Living organisms somehow came into being without a creator. Doesn't say that. And these living organisms keep evolving into higher life forms. It doesn't say that either. Evolution doesn't say any of those 3 things. Now, there might be people who say those things and use evolution as justification for that, but that's not what evolution itself says.
Yeah, I mean,
I'd be also interested to.
Go ahead. I was going to ask you, Jonathan. You're as a Christian, and as a biologist, it has to be, kind of disturbing that when you read something like this that says, look, evolution says there's no creator.
But then the counter argument is it just quotes biblical scripture.
Yeah, that's
Nehemiah 9:6.
Evolution and theism are broadly compatible. I would say, however, that evolution, if true, would be evidence against theism. I think that's a legitimate view, because on naturalism, evolution or something very like natural selection and chance variation is the only game in town, essentially. So there's a very high prediction on naturalism that's true, right? Whereas it's not clear that,
right?
Exactly, I'm taking a Bayesian approach on that.
Okay.
Now,
I agree.
So they claim that evolution is without proof. I mean, what do they mean by proof? In science, we don't talk about proofs and absolutes, right? We talk about what's the best explanation of the data, right? What's supported evidentially. We talk about proofs in pure mathematics and deductive logic, not in science.
No, absolutely. I'm glad you pointed that out. Science never proves anything. This is something that I even get into arguments with atheists and science people, and I try to explain to them, look, you equivocating the word proof. I use proof to mean logic proofs, and that's fine. I understand what they mean by proof. They mean evidence, but that's fine. I can use it that way. But when they say that science proves things, that is fundamentally against the nature of science. You don't want science to prove things, because once you prove something, it cannot be disproved. And science constantly has to change to give you the best explanation, given the most current data. And if science proves something, it would mean it can never change upon that. You'd still be doing Newtonian physics rather than Einsteinian. right? We wouldn't have special
Yeah.
relativity or general relativity
There's a
if science proved
colloquial
things. We don't
sense.
want science to prove things. Right.
There's a colloquial sense of proof where it means I've provided evidence that would basically make it perverse to disagree with my conclusion.
I'm fine with that.
Okay, but that's not the formal definition of proof. And the thing is,
Right.
too often people will say that one of those things is the other, and they'll conflate them, like Steve said. Because, things like, one thing that was recently proved, well, sort of recently, is Fermat's last theorem. We got a proof of that finally. Yay! Now, Captain Picard off in the Next Generation, he doesn't have to work on it anymore. That wasn't an episode. Anyway, but we're never going to get that kind of formal logical proof for universal common descent. No matter how true it may or may not be, it will literally never get that level of proof because it's impossible.
Do you know that Fermat actually, one of the last things he wrote in a margin supposedly was that he had a proof for it, but it was so simple that he didn't even want to include it in one of his margins.
Yeah, that's Fermat's last.
So nobody
theorem.
knew what the hell he was
That's
talking
what
about.
I'm talking about, Steve.
Right. Yeah,
that is exactly the thing I'm talking about.
Okay, so it's so weird because it's like, okay, what the hell was he talking about, right? But the proof that we have now,
is we don't know the proof.
Who the hell understands it?
Like some
Nobody
computers
understands that
do.
math, but like 6 people. Well, yeah, but certain people had to actually learn that mathematics in order to determine whether the proof was correct.
Right.
The way you did.
One of the interesting things is though, there's still work on Fermat's last theorem to see if we could come up with something that's more likely his. Because if he said that he doesn't have time to write it down now, but it's stunning in its simplicity, the current proof of that theorem is not stunning in its simplicity. It's stunning in its absurd complexity. So
we had to create new math
to
for
be
it.
done on that.
Right. Yeah, I agree. All right, but fascinating stuff. All right, what else we got in here, Dave? What are we reading now?
Okay, let me here. Let's just go with fill in the blanks. Just gonna see the two. Yeah, the two views on origins of life, obviously the creation model and then the evolutionary model. And question number 2, this is what I have a huge problem with. Scientists use the evolutionary model to explain the origins of life, while many secular science uses the evolutionary model. It kind of conflates with evolution, meaning abiogenesis, when in reality, abiogenesis is completely separate from evolution. Evolution, and this is a misconception in a lot of people. Evolution is a theory on biodiversity, not the origins of life. And that is just something that people just don't seem to understand. And this book seems to conflate the two theories together and kind of wanted to put them into one.
Yeah, I mean, let me ask Jonathan here. Do you think that one day it would be beneficial and more of an extended synthesis that abiogenesis, if we can solve abiogenesis to explain life from non-life, it is incorporated in a more holistic evolutionary theory?
There's a view in Origin of Life Studies called prebiotic selection, which is a form of selection before you have the first self-replicating molecule. Sure, this is an issue of semantics at this point. Generally, Origins of Life Studies is considered to be separate from evolutionary biology, but they're interlinked and interrelated, and I wouldn't necessarily have a problem. I wouldn't be particularly pedantic about the way that these words are used.
No, I agree.
I think they could be used interrelated. Yeah.
I don't have a problem that either. Can we check out the Loch Ness Monster? Because I'm kind of excited for that.
Yeah, that'll be good.
Yeah, let's do it.
I'm down for some Loch Ness Monster.
Yeah.
Yes.
Go for it.
Nessie as evidence against evolution. 5 odder things kids are taught. The Accelerated Christian Education curriculum is used in more than 50 UK schools. How can it receive official backing? Accelerated Christian Education's fundamentalist curriculum is used by more than 50 British schools. It is known for silent classrooms where students teach themselves using workbooks in isolated booths. Professor Harry Bry.
That sounds like an actual torture device. Describes
A.C.E.'s view as quote, a teleological account of American history as leading to the ultimate fulfillment of God's will, end quote.
Yep, God is a right-winger.
You may be unsurprised to learn that ACE was founded in Texas. Hey!
Oh!
ACE made headlines last year.
I'm not surprised to learn.
ACE
Not
made
at all.
headlines last year for a science textbook that cites the existence of the Loch Ness Monster as evidence against evolution. Despite this, government agencies UK NARIC defended its decision to deem ACE's in-house qualifications and International Certificate of Christian Education comparable to A levels. Incredibly, Nessie isn't ACE's most bizarre claims. Here are 5 more. God is a right-winger. No transitional fossils exist. Solar fusion is a myth. Evolution is an absurd, deliberate lie.
Wait, what? So hold on.
Hey,
we have to go back up to
no,
solar.
yeah, I know. I mean,
fusion is a myth.
Let's gotta go back. Let's gotta go back here.
There's only 5.
Science
proves homosexuality is a learned behavior. All right, let's start with number 1. God is a right-winger. Liberals are the root of all political evil. God's values are right-wing, and anything else is a rejection of his will. On a politics chart, right is associated with absolute and God, while left is connected with no values and atheism. The term left-wing, we learn, exists because left means sinister, to twist something, or to corrupt. Jesus, by contrast, taught that, quote, we should use what we have to earn profit, end quote. If your political views lean left, you are neither a true Christian nor a good citizen.
Sal, do you want to weigh in this one? Because I'm a social liberal and I'm a social conservative. I have no idea what the hell they're talking about.
I think God likes the right wingers. I wouldn't say he is one. I wouldn't go so far as to say that they're, someone who's left wing is neither a Christian or a good citizen. But
I don't even know how they're even involving politics in this. It's unimaginable to me, because I mean, you have Christian lefts, you have Christian centrists, you have Christian right. There's some that are normal, there's some that are radical, but it has nothing to do with political beliefs. That God is somehow a right-wing pundit or something. I don't know, man. It's bizarre. Well, and what does this have to do with ACE curriculum? I mean, why are they getting involved in politics, Dave?
What was that?
I don't know. So I'm not going to defend that statement in whole, but I do think God does like the Republican platform when it's conservative, and I don't think God likes socialism. Much, so I happen to think socialism has God smiling on your fiscal conservatism.
Yeah, don't ask me to do Keynesian curves. The band curves confuse me. But though the dwarf of House of Torque for 5 Australia says, I did ACE at school, and I can tell you they had closed desks.
This whole thing
seems like I will say that
just a torture chamber for kids, honestly.
Oh yeah, this is bizarre.
No social interaction, just readings.
By the way,
yeah.
If I could point out, I think this was from 2012 when this was published. I actually am using one of the things here, solar fuel myth. It is 1096. I actually have this page in front of me, 1096. I have more of an updated edition. This is the 4th edition from, and this was published in 2016. And this textbook, this workbook rather, no longer uses solar fusion being a myth. So I think that was an older.
This was published on Friday, the 1st of February of 2013.
Well, let's get into that, because again, why would they think it's a myth to begin with, right? So we'll get there. That's number 3. So the second one, the no transitional fossils exist. This is one of the worst creation arguments that I think is out there.
Yeah, and just sorry, one more time. This was actually published in 2016, so this is more updated from 2013. So maybe
they're updating their views, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, props to them, right? But the fact that they even said that to begin with is odd, But as far as the no transitional fossils exist, I mean, the reason why I have such an animosity for that particular statement is because every fossil that exists is transitional. There's no such thing as a non-transitional fossil, in my opinion. Now, Dapper could kind of give us more specifics on that, but I mean, all organisms are in a state of transition. Nobody's in their final form unless it's Pokemon. And so when we're talking about transitional fossils, what they generally mean, though, are certain fossils that have certain characteristic traits between different lines of phylogeny to say that they're somehow related to each other. But we have tons of examples of those, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of examples of those things. So when they say that no transitional fossils exist, I want to know, based upon what the ACE education is, what the hell they mean by a transitional fossil, because it's none like anything else anybody's ever understood a transitional fossil to be. Even Stephen Jay Gould, has very specific things what a transitional fossil would be. What do they mean by it? So let's read it.
Yeah.
No transitional fossils exist. Despite the avalanche of transitional fossils, ACE still shouts about mysterious gaps. Quote, though evolutionists have been searching for transitional fossils for more than 100 years, they have found none, end quote, narrates one presenting accelerated Christian education video. Nope, none. Not only that, but we can be certain, quote, no transitional fossils have been or will ever be discovered because God created each type of fish, amphibian, and reptile as separate, unique animals, end quote. I'm sure the scientists who excavated Tiktaalik will be crushed to learn that their discovery doesn't, in fact, exist. But even without fossils, evolution is thoroughly supported by DNA and a wealth of other evidence.
I'm sure Neil Schumann would love to know that the whole Tiktaalik thing doesn't exist, because I'm pretty sure that it does. They found hundreds of examples of Tiktaalik, and was it off the coast of Nova Scotia somewhere? I mean, Dapper, why don't you take this one? Hang on one sec, Dave. I want Dapper to weigh in this one. This is something he does kind of know quite a bit about. What the hell are they talking about, dude?
So, all right. So there's a few things. One is you got to say, like, what's a transitional fossil? So there is a sense in which Steve is right, where you can say that since evolution is demonstrably true, and I'm going to just go with that for now. We can have that argument later, but since it is demonstrably true, then any fossil that you find is going to be in transition from its ancestral character state to the character state of its descendants, assuming that you haven't found the last examples of this species alive. In which case, I guess you could say it reached an endpoint. But chances are you didn't find that, so who cares? Second, I want to say that, of course, V is our transitional fossil. We're just not sure in which direction the transition is going. Remember? So, but anyway, if we want... But in a more serious sense, when we say a transitional fossil, what we typically mean is that we have an idea of a derived set of organisms. So, for instance, tetrapods are very derived compared to the whole of Sarcopterygi, both modern and fossil. And Sarcopterygi is the lobe-finned fish. It includes, all, like frogs and humans, as well as lungfish and coelacanths and a bunch of other stuff. So when we say we want to find a transitional fossil, we're saying, okay, we have this idea of a basal Sarcopterygian fish, something like Eusthenopteron, looks sort of like a lobe-finned fish version of like a barracuda or something. And then we have derived tetrapods. And at this point, we're still thinking things are quote-unquote amphibian, although not technically part of modern amphibia. So we're talking about things like, well, if I say the names, no one's going to recognize anyone, so it doesn't matter.
There's
we're talking
some
about things
stuff
like
between elephants and
reptilian monster. Right.
There's some stuff between elephants and pine trees. Yeah.
Right. So Tiktaalik is transitional because it meets the morphology that we would expect of something evolving from something that looks like, say, Eusthenopteron to something that looks like Koolasuchus, which is sort of like if you turned a frog into a crocodile. And so it has that intermediate morphology. So it's beginning to separate its cranium from its pectoral girdle. Its fins/legs are starting to get the joints and a number of bones associated with tetrapod limbs and things like that. And it's also found at about the same time that we're expecting this transition to have happened, based both on fossil evidence as well as genetic divergence times that we're getting from things like phylogenetic replacement rates and things like that. So when we say it's transitional, what we mean is we predicted this kind of anatomy to exist. We kind of figure out where it is or so, and then we go looking and we find it. And this is one of the things that argues strongly for common ancestry, at least among plants and animals, which are the things we have the most fossils of.
By the way,
because these predicted transitional fossils. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I do sincerely apologize, but I am going to go up pretty soon.
Oh no, David.
Oh,
yeah,
Dave, thank you. No, I'm glad you were to make it. I know that you weren't able to, so I appreciate you.
Yes.
Being able to.
So, Steve, I do want to I want to say thank you so much for agreeing to have me. I had a really good time, and hopefully we could maybe do it again. Dr. McLatchie, it was a pleasure meeting you, and I hope we can have conversations in the future. Sal and Dapper, it's good to see you guys again. Announcement:
Great to see you, man.
I will be debating Mr. Kent Hovind on Thursday on Waiting for Truth's channel. So
I don't know if I said good luck or I'm sorry.
I'm gonna wish you good luck, David. That's
Bring
what
the
we are
painkillers.
creationists. I hope you whip him.
Yeah,
Yep,
give Kent my best, will you?
Yep. Have you stopped beating your wife?
Ooh.
Anyway,
Well, he stopped beating the old one. We don't know about the new one yet.
Yep. So, and
that's
I will be.
Oh, that hurts.
Yeah, I will be
Man.
hosting an after show on my channel, so please subscribe to my channel. I know Steve put the link in the description down below.
Yep.
I'm hosting an after show on it, so you definitely don't want to miss it. Thank you once again, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, David. Yeah, but that snark was perfect timing because as you know, I've been talking to Cindy, who seems like a very very nice person.
Oh, Cindy's awesome. I love Cindy.
Very very nice. I sense nothing disingenuous about her whatsoever.
For those who
we
might not
obviously
know,
have
Cindy,
different. Good.
For those who might not know in the audience, Cindy is Kent Hovind's. Well, he is the second woman after his legal marriage that he's called his wife.
Third. Total.
None of them have been legal marriages, but he's now with actually, I don't even know if they were together long enough for it to count.
They
would
have been. Yeah, it wasn't long enough. It wasn't long enough. Yeah, I know.
But he's now with a fourth woman. But anyway, Cindy Lincoln is the person who he was convicted of abusing.
Mm-hmm.
And currently that conviction stands. It is on appeal, but currently he is in fact a convicted domestic abuser of Cindy. She's been on my channel. She's probably going to be on this channel. She's a lovely woman. And I mean, we have.
She was really, really nice. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Look, sometimes Cindy and
she's a friend of Sal's too. Yeah, she's a friend of Sal's too.
Actually, I think I introduced you to.
We like I said, we could put aside our differences as far as our scientific beliefs. When it comes to domestic violence, everybody should be on the same page. And her story is just, it has to be one that gets out there. I personally am absolutely convinced of what she has went through with Kent being a narcissistic toxic abuser. He had lied about me. He's lied about other people I've known. I think he is a narcissist. I think he is evil incarnate. And of course, I had him on my channel many, many times, and it used to be about younger creations. I mean, we already had to have those kind of dialogues, but I mean, I know he's just not a good person, and Cindy wants to get her information out there, and I'm happy to give her a platform. Like I said, I've sensed nothing disingenuous about her whatsoever. But anyways,
she did an interview with myself, AJ, Atheist Junior. So if you want to check out like Atheist Junior's channel or my channel, there are interviews with her there if you want to get that story. But can I just point one thing that's a little bit off topic about these ACE books that I kind of hate?
Sure.
It's their pronunciation guide. It's so clunky and obtuse, and I hate it. And this is as someone who's kind of an enthusiast of languages. Every time I look at it, it makes me want to cry. That's not really related.
Sal, I think you had something you wanted to say about the transitional fossil stuff, right?
Yes. Thank you. I have a list of what I consider bad creationist arguments, and that's one of them. Don't say that there are no transitionals. Just avoid that topic. You'll be slaughtered.
CMI does the same thing. CMI, Creationist Ministries International. I rank these organizations as well. To me, like Answers in Genesis is the bottom of creationists wrong. They have the worst arguments. I mean, they still think moon dust on the moon is a good argument for creation.
Well, I mean, we all know the moon is cheese, so I don't even know what they're trying to say.
Of course. And so they also say as well, don't argue the transitional fossils because that's not something that creationists should get into, right? But you don't have to go back to it.
I always don't argue that because it's wrong. Just don't argue it because you'll lose.
Yeah, exactly. It's not don't argue it because you're not going to have a good time.
No, I actually believe there are lots of transitionals.
I mean like
AFC, I actually believe in transitionals. I just think they're not physical; they're conceptual. But I see it, just like as Dapper Dino was describing the progressions. It's like, yeah, I totally agree with that.
I mean, there would have to be, because even in creationism, species that are related that could, used to be able to interbreed through some kind of, allopathic speciation like the Encetina salamander. Creationists still need to be able to explain that. And so these are different species that all of a sudden have inabilities to breed with this one, but can breed with this one. Even though they're so genetically similar, there's just minuscule little differences because of geological separations and those isolated boundaries that the creationist model still has to be able to explain that. And so, so I wanted to real quick, Chesh, the whole fusion thing. Can I just touch on that for a second?
Yeah, and solar fusion is a myth. It is a nuclear fusion that has enabled our sun to shine for billions of years. ACE are determined to prove that the universe is less than 10,000 years old, in line with their literal interpretation of Genesis. As a result, they teach that solar fusion is, quote, an invention of evolution scientists, ellipses. All other theories require the sun to use up all of its energy sooner than evolutionists' invented timetable would allow, end quote. This preposterous suggestion is part of a wider campaign to discredit mainstream science.
I mean, this should have been something that anybody would have recognized as wrong once they discovered the neutrino. Or at least I should say when we discovered neutrinos.
These are 8th graders, guys. Come on.
But I mean, one of the ways that they determine the nuclear processes that go on a star, okay, so it's basically a very simple process of hydrogen being converted to helium, and then helium converted to higher elements like beryllium and oxygen, and then you have carbon, nitrogen, oxygen cycle, and then finally to iron. But one of the ways we detect this is the type of neutrinos that come out of these nuclear interactions for these proton-proton cycles. These things were predicted. They said, look, if this is how the sun operates, if this is the chemical makeup of the star, which we can detect through spectrography, if this is what's going on, we would expect neutron energy levels to be of this, existence, right? But the problem is neutrinos don't really interact with mass very well. They had to build these very big vats full of chlorine and these detectors to detect any neutron interaction between the chlorine atoms in this big vat of water. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. They do happen. And so once they just discover these neutrinos matched our predictive models, they knew that, of course, there was fusion going on in the sun. It wasn't a matter of anything to do with evolution. It was a matter of, hey, this is the evidence. This is how a weak, nuclear decay works. This is how proton-proton cycles work. This is a 4-step process. Each one has to reduce, put a neutrino out that has to go somewhere. And we detected them. There you go. Confirmation of a predictive model that shows that, yes, the sun is one big fusion reactor.
I kind of enjoy that just each one of these seems to touch on a different area in science. So, like, there's the Loch Ness Monster. Okay. Then there's politics. Sorry, I shouldn't say poli-sci, but, like, they touch on, like, different areas and different, like, kinds of expertise. Transitional fossils for geology, then solar fusion, then evolution is an absurd and deliberate lie, which is going to go into, like, social sciences, and then the gay agenda.
Yeah, I'm sorry David left because I would have asked, hey Dave, how'd you learn how to be gay? Can I go read about how to learn how to be gay? Because I don't understand how
obviously
they can say
from
that.
them,
It's a learned
I
behavior.
Guess. Evolution.
I didn't learn to be straight. It's just I don't know how they even make that argument.
Evolution is an absurd and deliberate lie, which I'm sure our good doctor is a part of, right? Although
he's part of the conspiracy.
It's part of the conspiracy. ACE makes no bones about being creationists. They sometimes claim they also teach evolution. Oh, well, evolution is mentioned frequently. It's only to ridicule it. We are told, quote, even from a strictly scientific standpoint, the theory of evolution is absurd, end quote. Evolution is described as impossible and not true science. Scientists, it seems, know evolution is one big hoax. Quote, because evolutionists do not want to believe the only alternative, that the universe was created by God, they declare evolution as a fact and believe it is impossible. It's impossible claims without any scientific proof! Exclamation mark, end quote. While the scientists push their indefensible theory, ACE sees the obvious truth. Quote, we have a risen Christ, unquestionable proofs, and as if we needed it, God has thrown in a host of inarguable evidences all around us! Exclamation mark, end quote. This line of thinking writes off the majority of Christians who reconcile their faith with evolution as not true believers. It also denigrates scientists as conspiracy theorists. This worldwide worldview is antithetical to reasonable education.
All right, Dr. McLatchie, why don't you edify on this? Because, you're part of the machine that perpetuates this.
Yeah, I think this is very much conspiratorial language, and there's clearly not a conspiracy. People are sincerely persuaded by the scientific data that evolution is true and that natural selection explains the complexity of life. I disagree with that assessment. I think that there's a good case that can be made, as I said earlier, for common descent, but I'm not sold on the idea of natural selection, genetic mutation. But nonetheless, we have to be charitable about people's motives and assume that if that's what they say that they're persuaded by, that's what they're persuaded by. I don't think that there's any sort of conspiracy in the scientific community or what the objective would be behind such a conspiracy.
A question for
So what
Sal
about
then.
Okay.
If you've got, I would assume that Sal would agree that going this route is not going to be necessarily convincing and is going to drive people away. So what would you maybe recommend?
I really don't know. This is the first time that I've ever thought about how to teach this to kids. And, because most of the people I deal with are post-college, they're graduate students, some of them PhDs. So I'm sorry I can't offer an opinion, but I don't think this is, we are laughing at this, but then on the other side of the coin, it's like, these are my people. This really hurts to see what's happening to them. So,
and I think you should feel offended by it. I honestly do. I think that, look, this makes young creationists have, a range of arguments, but this makes all young creationists look silly. This even makes, Christians look silly. And that's not the intent, what I think people should have. I mean, Dr. McLatchie, I'm sure, will point out there, he probably has no issue with theistic evolutionists, people that say, yeah, I accept, evolutionary theory, hook, line, sinker, or whatever, but I also believe that God is the one that put it all into practice. I mean, you're not going to say to those people they're not real Christians, right?
Right.
I'm not going to say they're not Christians. I would say they're wrong in their assessment, but I wouldn't say that they're not Christians.
That's fine, but it's not a matter of Christianity. Christianity is not contingent upon somebody accepting evolutionary theory or not. I don't remember reading anywhere in the Bible where it says, hey, you're not a true Christian if you accept evolution. It just makes no sense to me. Now, do I think that Christianity and evolutionary theory have some incompatibilities? Perhaps. And I think you pointed out very well that in Bayesian approach, if evolutionary theory is completely correct the way it's stated, then it is disconfirmational towards a theistic position. At least not fully, of course, but it is evidence against. And that Bayesian approach, I think you're spot on and correct because it deals with naturalistic approach. But it doesn't mean that it's not true. You can have them coexist with each other or different degrees, because not all Christians agree on Christian theology. So I think it's insulting to all. I mean, as a science person, this insults me. As a Christian, it should insult you. As a younger creationist, Sal, it should insult you. The only thing they haven't got into yet is gender stuff for me. Me?
Am I the one in charge of gender stuff?
What do you no, you've got to have something be offended by. What are you offended by in here?
But I did want to say
offended by.
Yeah, but I wanted to say that I do agree with the conclusion that evolutionary theory is absurd in the scientific sense, but I wouldn't.
That's not how you would get there.
That's exactly it. I wouldn't do it by arguments, by assertion, and I would always treat the other side a lot more respectably, with a lot more respect. It's like, if you're trying to find an opponent, the worst thing you could do is disrespect him, and not think he's formidable. In this,
but there's so even though, Sal, real quick, obviously, I've dealt with a lot of flat earthers and young creationists. Some of them are just not worth having a conversation with. You're articulate, you're educated. We could have great discussions on young creationism, pros, cons, and whatever. But there are some people that are in your set that are just not capable of having those types of dialogues. But that you're not the only set that has that. I mean, even in the non-believer set, I've got people that are self-proclaimed non-believers or atheists that I would not spend 5 minutes having a conversation with. They're just absolutely inept across the board on philosophy or even what atheism, is about or anything of that nature. So, you have to pick your poison, because we're going to, like, for example, all of us agree that the earth is not flat, right? So when we have a flat earther come on, sure, there might be some that I'm going to treat with a little bit more respect if they can have a little more articulate arguments. But if they just come on and go, hey, look, water doesn't bend. Yeah, I'm going to be a little more dismissive of that, if that makes sense.
What are the more articulate
I need to get going in a few. Just to say quickly, I need to leave in a few minutes. So
we are on the last one.
Yeah,
so let's
we're
burn through
going to wrap
real
this up
quick.
by 7 o'clock. But if you want to take off now, that's perfectly fine. Or if you want to wait 4 minutes,
I'll wait till the end.
Science proves homosexuality is a learned behavior. Quote, because extensive tests have shown that there is no biological difference between homosexuals and others, these tests seem to prove that homosexuality is a learned behavior. The Bible teaches that homosexuality is a sin. In the Old Testament times, God commanded that homosexuals be put to death. Since God never commanded death for normal or acceptable actions, it is as unreasonable to say that homosexuality is normal as it is to say that murder or stealing is normal, end quote. Quite apart from the flawed logic here, scientific consensus points to a genetic component in sexual orientation. But faith is not enough for ACE. Even science must be shown to support their prejudice. The curriculum is designed to mold minds, not to question the absolute truth, and this simply is not education.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people in the, unfortunately, in that side of the fence, like the Matt Powells of the world and the Ken Hovins of the world, that actually advocate that gay people should be put to death by the government, which I think could be as one of the most morally egregious things I've ever heard in my life. And anybody who worships a God like that, I have to question that, the morality of that God. Yeah, of course it is. And so we're not going to touch too much on that. So yeah, we're going to kind of leave it there, guys. This has been great.
Really? Wait. We're not going to touch too much on that. I feel like we should touch on that a little bit.
What would you like to? What would you like to touch on? That's just it's. Just
I mean,
wrong.
Considering the rumors going around about Kent Hovind's relationship with Matt Powell and how that might be going on.
Oh, let me. I look at as Sal knows and Dapper knows, Cindy has a lot to talk about Stephen and
I've been
Powell
sworn
and other
to
things.
secrecy on these matters.
I'm not saying any details, but there's some complexities there. There's some complexities, okay?
Considering Kent Hovind's argumentation about how the government needs to get their nose out of his taxes that he's not paying, then why would he want the government stepping in somewhere else?
Yeah.
Actually, to be fair,
would he be more willing to pay his taxes if he knew that those tax dollars were going to go to murdering people? Probably.
Apparently, he has somewhat cleaned his act in terms of taxation. Primarily by paying anyone.
Allegedly.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah, they're not.
If you don't pay anyone, you don't have payroll taxes.
They're not. Yeah, there's no employees, no FUCAS, FICAS, all that. So, anyways, Dr. McLatchie, always a pleasure seeing me.
Do you have any last words of wisdom for us, Doctor?
Yes. Give us some parting advice,
please.
Well, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate how friendly this platform is, and that we can have respectful and friendly conversations about these issues, and even agree on a lot of stuff as well. So thanks.
I thank you for that. That's what I want Non-Sequitur to be. Now, I'm not going to say it's going to happen all the time. There'll be dumpster fires, but they're going to be dumpster fires of people with, again, they're just. We met somebody last night on my channel. Probably going to be a dumpster fire. They had a very unique perspective. Believing that they have been somehow picked by Jesus to be a messenger of Armageddon, and Jesus literally gave this guy the dove from the ark that flies around the head. Yeah, it's whatever. But anyways, Sal,
the John of Patmos 8.
Yeah, that's going to be a dumpster fire. But Sal, I want to thank you especially again as being a young creationist to come in. We're going to bring you on again. I want to have a lot more discussions with you on young creationism. But I have to admit, it's a rarity when I meet a younger creationist that actually knows the science as well.
Is able to have a conversation without turning into a screeching monkey.
Yeah, because you're not saying they're using just rhetoric and just nonsense. You actually, I think you actually want to get to the truth, whatever it is. I mean, we disagree on what that truth is, but there's certain things even in science you recognize. Hey, I'm not going to go so far to say that the sun's not a fusion reactor. I mean, come on, that to me is just mind-boggling. So I want to thank you for that, Sal.
Thank you, and thank you. It's been a pleasure meeting you finally.
Sal? Where can we find you? When people go subscribe
Evidence and Reasons, evidenceandreasons.org will lead you to my YouTube channel, and you'll have all the nerd shows. It'll put people to sleep. So but thank you.
We'll check it out.
Free advertisement. Yeah, I look forward to meeting you again, Steve.
We will. I definitely. And Dapper, I want to thank you for bringing Sal on, and I want to thank you for joining us to bring your expertise on this particular topic as well. and we're going to see you next
My
week.
expertise
So,
is much exaggerated. I'm a lay person who's well read.
That's how I describe myself as well. I'm a lay person, but I don't think I'm an idiot in most of these topics. So
I'm a lay person and I'm an idiot.
and-
I'm barely a person. I'm a goblin.
we don't. She's a bot. We don't even know why she's here. V, what do we got next week?
Next week
And
we
then
have
take us
Landon
out.
Kurt Noah coming on to talk to us. Old school, cool nuke school.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about Chernobyl. We're going to talk about a
Physics.
reactor accident called SL1 that happened in the Army that I had a little about in nuke school, and what happened
some
there
dark
and
stuff.
why it should never happen again. It's some what really happened there was just really dark, and a lot of people have no idea that was the most deadliest reactor accident of all history. So anyways, we're going to end this. I want you guys to, if you can, go subscribe to these gentlemen's channels. They're in the video description. Also, Aaron, EKC People Suck, is having a stream immediately following this, like happening right now. I'm putting the link in the video description. Go over there and say hi to her for me. Will you do me a favor? Just go over and say hi, Aaron, from the Non-Sequitur Show, from both V and I. And with that, V, would you
Like
to
and
take us out?
yeah, make sure you like and subscribe. Patreon is out, and as well, keep an eye out. The Discord should be up soon, as well as the Teespring is up. So if you're interested in some of the old merch, to try and grab it before it was gone, because we're not getting rid of anything on the channel, but there's some stuff on there that's gotta go. So if you
It's a
second
natural
want to get any of
progression
the
of the
old
show.
stuff, the natural progression of the show is that shit's gotta go.
It's a natural projection.
We'll
It's a
see you
natural progression of the
guys
show.
next week. Bye.